The Dark World is in my opinion one of Deltarune's biggest mysteries, up there with W.D. Garster and Ralsei's true identity. It's weird to me because even though we spend a majority of the game in the Dark World, we don't actually know what the Dark World is. Is it a shared dream that Chris and Susie have? Is it just a bunch of kids playing around in their school? There is a lot of mystery surrounding what the Dark World is, and today I had a revelation about it, and I wanted to share that with you. Let's try to cover all of the definites of the Dark World. We currently know that there are 3 entrances to the Dark World. One in the school supply closet, one in the library's computer lab, and one in the living room of Chris's house. These lead to Ralsei's castle, the entrance of the cyberworld, and an unknown place. But considering all the evidence gathered from the Spamton Sweepstakes event, we can assume this is going to be linked to the TV and green room. 5 people are currently known to have entered the Dark World. Chris and Susie entered through the school in Chapter 1. Berdly and Noelle entered through the computer lab in Chapter 2, and before the events of Deltarune, we know that Asriel had entered the Dark World, as seen in the prison area of Queen's Lair. Leaving the Dark World can happen through Castle Town and closing a fountain. What's interesting is that at the start of Chapter 2, when you go back to Hometown, if you check your inventory, you'll see a bunch of playing cards and junk in your inventory. This is of note because you actually gain Rules, Lancer, and possibly the original Starwalker in your party before you go to the Light World. This means that these characters don't actually exist in the Light World. So now that we've established all of the facts of the Dark World, let's look further into that last point. If the characters in the Dark World don't exist in the Light World, then what is the Dark World? Well, I believe that the Dark World is a coping mechanism for every character that interacts with it. Let's look at Noelle. Noelle in the events of Deltarune is dealing with 2 heavy things, the death of her sister, December, and the deteriorating health of her father, Rudolph. These are evident in the Dark World, especially with December. Her name is literally spelled out when Noelle talks about an incident with Chris, Asriel, and her sister. Des is mentioned all throughout the 2nd chapter, with being mentioned at the view of the city, as well as Noelle stumbling on the word December in Berdly's spelling bee flashback. Plus, Noelle does end up seeing positives within the Dark World ending of the chapter, which makes the reason of her wanting to possibly escape from the stresses of her dad's health condition more reasonable. This doesn't just apply for Noelle though. Berdly also exhibits his connection to the Dark World. As we see in his flashback, intelligence is a major insecurity for him, and attempting to live up to the expectations that others have for him. This can be found within Queen's character, who offers the perfect intelligence, a trait that Berdly clearly sees as interesting, but he later has a revolution about his intelligence with Susie, highlighting that in the Dark World, intelligence doesn't really matter, creating Berdly's escapism from his real-world insecurity of expectations. Speaking of Susie, her problems can also be escaped from in the Dark World. The biggest problem I believe that Susie contains is the lack of friends that she had. In her school she was feared, looked at weirdly, even made fun of. But in the Dark World she has friends like Ralsei and Lancer and all the enemies that she spared. Susie is shown to possibly not have a family in Chapter 2 by her sort of weird response to the sleepover, and it seems that in the Dark World she's got her own family made up of friends and interesting characters. Finally, the biggest person who supports this theory is Chris. Chris clearly misses Asriel. You can literally name Onion Asriel too. His character is established all throughout the game. And even people have theorized that the devil horns worn by Chris could be the horns that Ralsei has because they're the same color. It's very, very clear that Chris misses Asriel. So I believe that Ralsei is that replacement for Asriel, created by the Dark World. Ralsei is an anagram for Asriel. They share a similar design, which is even mentioned by Noelle in Chapter 2 as she finds Ralsei familiar. The Dark World could be a way for people to remove themselves from their worries in the real world. These characters are going through a rough time in the game, being the age of 16 to 18, they're becoming adults and independent. It's a rough transition. That's a lot of projection right there. Another thing that Chris struggles with is a lack of control. This is seen with Susie bullying them and interrupting them within the opening of the 1st chapter of the game. This control was given back to Chris at the start of Chapter 1 in the Dark World, through them being able to act. But this was slowly ripped from Chris in the 2nd chapter where Susie is able to make decisions for Chris, the SNR actions being split in the first part of the city. It appears that cracks are starting to show within this part of the Dark World, and you can either submit to the lack of control and accept that, well, you can't always get your way, or you can get a bit malicious with your control as seen within Snowgrave, where Chris has complete control over the actions of Noelle. Also, Spamton refers to themselves as a puppet as well as calling Chris a puppet, which kind of adds to the lack of control that Chris actually has, being a puppet. And that correlates with the entire lore of Deltarune. We don't actually know if these actions that we are making are actually Chris's actions or us controlling them. Lack of control is a very, very big thing for Chris's character. Another thing to talk about is how quickly the 4 people who we've actually seen enter the Dark World respond immediately. Susie gets drawn in instantly, doesn't really question what the Dark World is. Sure, that sounds weird, and I don't really mean that she doesn't go, what is this place? She does. But I mean like she doesn't really attempt to break down the logic of this place. She doesn't go like, oh, why are we just playing with toys? This is dumb. Nobody does this. Not Berdly, not Noelle. They all very quickly believe that they've been transported into some weird world. But then they all awake together in a real world once Chris restores the fountain. So, what is actually going on here? Let's answer the big question. What is the Dark World? Is it a coping mechanism that people get magically drawn into and believe to escape the worrying parts of reality? Is it just kids playing in a fantasy world with toys for fun? Or is everything true? There really is a dark world that people just go into, and everything that I've brought up so far has just been a fluke. Let's talk about the pros and cons of each theory. The coping mechanism could work, but it seems like an additional thing. The Dark World isn't just a coping mechanism because there's no structure to it. What actually happens for this Dark World to be created? It's not just a delusion, there's something clearly attached to reality going on, evident by the things in Chris's inventory. This would lead to the kids' playing theory to be more correct, which has a lot of evidence backing up. The evidence for this can be the room next to the supply closet having a lot of things in it that correlate to the Dark World, like the chessboard, the playing cards, the light switch representing the fountain, which I actually learned that's the reason why they're called lighteners, because they literally turn on the light. Pretty smart. However, I believe that this theory could be combined with the coping mechanism, that the kids are playing in these rooms and removing their worries together, creating a safe world for them to be themselves in. The final option that I said was the Dark World is real. The evidence for this is in the ending of chapter 2, where Chris is able to create a fountain. Now this could genuinely be real, or this is just us seeing the imagination from Chris's perspective. Another piece of evidence for this is Noelle's ring in the Snowgrave route. At the end of the game you have this very dark sequence where Chris reveals that they actually have Noelle's ring. But this could also just be explained by Chris taking it in the real world. I think we'll have to see the reaction to the newest characters who enter the Dark World in chapter 3 to see if it's real or not, but at the moment I think the most likely option is that it's just kids playing and attempting to deal with their worries of the world. Sorry for interrupting, but this is me just kind of listening back while I'm editing, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know what to believe anymore. While in this video a few seconds ago I just said it's probably the kids playing, but there is so much evidence that contradicts it. I re-looked at the inventory stuff, and yeah, the inventory says that yes, you have the playing cards, you have the ball of junk, but how does Chris get the ring? I'm so stumbled on this. This Snowgrave route is just a subversion of everything. You'd think this is fake, but I can't fully say it's fake. There's so many parts of this that seem like the Dark World is actually real, but there's so much evidence that suggests it's not, so I genuinely believe that, I'm sorry for leading you on for the last 8 minutes, but I don't know. Is it real? Is it not? I think chapter 3 will reveal it all. Thank you for watching this video. I don't actually know if this is new or anything. I genuinely just thought of it today and just wanted to talk about it. You know, Deltarune is such an interesting game. There's so much we don't know, and I'm very excited to see what's next. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments. I'd love to read them. I always love reading comments, so feel free to say some theories, prove me wrong, or, talk about something else. I'd love to read it. That out of the way, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. There's something missing from this video. It feels like there's some sort of joke or reference I could have made, but I just can't think of it. Oh.